all board. It's COVID-19 day 3 on lockdown. I closed the salon as of, I think, yesterday. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But as most of you know, my second passion is cooking or baking or, well, both at the same time. So I thought, because there's seemingly a shortage of bread, I'm gonna show you what I make bread with. I've been making this since probably November or December, and I make 2 loaves a week. It is literally, I think, 6 ingredients. There's no eggs involved, so if there's a shortage of eggs, at least there's no eggs involved. I found this recipe on the website I Heart Nap Time. I cannot remember the name of the girl that runs it. I will find that out later. But it's literally the nicest sandwich bread, grilled cheese bread, French toast. It makes great French toast. And it's just as simple as you can get it without a lot of preservatives that you would buy in the store. As everybody else also knows, I try and keep things as process-free in my house for my 2 girls, with medications and so on and so forth. So I would typically make it in the big KitchenAid mixer, but not everybody has one. So I figured that I would use just, the bowl, because you also need another greased bowl and 2 loaf pans. It makes 2 loaves. You also need 2 cups of warm water, half a tablespoon of sugar, and 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. So you put the sugar and the yeast in the bowl first, and then about 110 degree hot water, 2 cups, you pour that over and let it bloom for about 10 minutes. You also need 1/4 cup of butter. So not a lot at all. Make sure you scrape out the remnants so you get all of your ingredients in. A tablespoon of salt. I use kosher salt just because there's supposedly less process in that. You also need 1/2 cup of evaporated milk. Now, I use evaporated milk because that's what the recipe called for, but I think if you read in the comments or tips, you can also use buttermilk, maybe 3% like homogenized milk, or you can water down just regular cream. Sorry for the edit. So 1/2 cup of evaporated milk, but you can also make your own buttermilk. So it would be 1/2 cup less a tablespoon, and you would put the tablespoon either lemon juice or vinegar, and then let that sit for 5 minutes, and then you have sort of a homemade buttermilk. So that goes in also. It's only 1/4 cup of sugar for both loaves. So it's pretty minimal in sugar. I'm sure you could probably use other sweeteners if you are non-sugar, but I would definitely consult that particular website, iheartnaptime.com. Now I just mix this in so that way it gets rid of sort of all the granulated sugar. And then you're gonna pour in your 2 cups bloomed. Now, I don't know if you wanna zoom in just on how, foamy that should be. It should be pretty foamy. That's been sitting there at least 10 minutes in about 110 degree water. So we're gonna pour all of that in there, making sure we scrape out all the rest of the yeast and sugar, and it's very, very little sugar. So we're gonna whisk all of that in together, just so that everything is really mixed in. So now comes the flour. Like, it's seriously the easiest recipe on the planet. Now I would just use a leveler. I just use something to level off. So you take a 1 cup measuring cup. Now what you're gonna do is you are going to measure out. Make sure you pack it out so it's nice and. Some people sift their flour. I do not. Far too time consuming. So you're gonna measure out 3 cups of flour and put it right into the nice warm liquid. 2. And 3. So for this particular recipe, I end up using about 6 to 6.5, probably depending on how the temperature of the water is and it all sort of comes together. But you put the 3 cups in first and kind of mix it around. Again, if you're using your big mixer, you would mix your ingredients off of the mixer, the wet ingredients, and then put your dough hook on and put your 3 cups of flour in, and then use your dough hook. I would scrape as you go along, so that way you get all the goop off, and scrape a bit, mixing. Okay, so, and then you just sort of add a cup at a time until you get to about 5 cups, so there's 4 cups. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of mix it in a bit. There's not really kneading per se, but you just want it so that way all the little chunks of this flour kind of get mixed in a bit. If you have to, what you could do is just grab a pinch if it's still a bit sticky, and just make a ball. So with this ball, because now it's got to have the very first rise, it takes about an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 for the first rise. Follow me. So we're going to put it in our grease bowl, kind of roll it around a little bit, make sure that it's all the sides are covered. Okay, just like that. And you can either plastic wrap loosely, set it in a nice warm place. I like the microwave because it's pretty warm, and then turn on the light in the microwave. It kind of keeps it sort of warm-ish, warmer than usually my house. And then see you in an hour and 3/4. So we're back, and it's after 7 o'clock. Your bread is now risen, double in size. Usually it's only about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. I just left it longer because I cooked dinner, unfortunately. So all we do is we punch down the dough, sprinkle a little bit out on your counter or your roller. And this is the only knead that you'll ever do in this particular recipe. It's just a very, very quick 2-minute knead. Doesn't need a lot. It's just getting all the air bubbles out is all you do. I don't even need it for the full 2 minutes. Just enough to see all of the air pops. If you need more flour because it's sticking, especially if you've left it to rise more than you should, then you might need just a little bit more flour. As you can knead it, you're feeling all of the air pockets sort of release. But that's about all I do, just about that much. So we're gonna cut the dough into 2 and then roll it out into our rectangle. Doesn't have to be precise, probably just eyeball a half. You're gonna put just a little bit more flour, spread it around. Take a rolling pin. Now I try and sort of flatten it out so that way it's not really a circle, but stretch it out so that way your rectangle is a bit easier to roll out. So you're rolling it to one side, and it doesn't have to be a perfect rectangle. It just has to be more oblong. Then you can stretch it to whatever shape that you need. Flip it over if you have to. Put a little flour if it's a little bit sticky. So here's how I roll mine. This is the directions of the recipe. So we're gonna roll almost like you're doing a cinnamon roll, only it's a loaf of bread. So you roll it out and you tuck it in as you're going. tighter so that way you don't have any air holes in your bread. And you're gonna keep rolling it until you get to the end. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take this, so you're gonna grab the end of it and you're gonna tuck it in underneath itself, both ends. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna pinch the open ends here so that it's all nice and sealed in together. So then we're gonna put it into our grease prepared loaf pans. I have 2 because it's a 2 loaf recipe. Tuck it in if you need to. And then go ahead and do your second one. Okay, so we've got our loaves in our greased loaf pans. Now you cover them with saran wrap. Now I like to just give them a quick spray on the top so that way the saran wrap doesn't stick to it. Been there, done that, and then they collapse. And then then you wait for the second rise. Now I like to, because I'm using stoneware, I like them quite bubbled. So probably about 1.5 inches taller than your bread pan usually is the norm. And then we bake them at 325 if you have convection, 350 if you don't, for 25 minutes. Okay, so we finished the final rise. Your bread should, or your dough should look like this. So like I said, about 1.5 to 2 inches above the level of the pan. And then we're going to put it into for me, a 325 degree oven for 25 minutes. And I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so our bread's out of the oven. So nice and golden, hollow. You should be able to tap it. It should sound hollow. So I usually so the recipe calls for you take about a teaspoon or a tablespoon of butter. You can take a pastry brush. I don't have one, I just have a silicone brush. And you just brush lightly a little butter over top. This is what gets the really nice soft tops. Make sure you do all the outside of the bread also. And then you really just let it sit until it cools, just enough for you to handle the bread to be outside of the loaf pan, so that way it doesn't sweat. If you leave it in the pan too long, the bottom of your bread will get sweaty, and then you'll have to leave it out extra long for it to dry, and you don't want that, or it will, unfortunately, go stale. So that's pretty much it. I mean, other than the time consuming of letting it rise twice, the first step, it's only, 10 minutes? Second step, again, maybe another 5 or 8 minutes. But in the meantime, you put this together and let the first rise, go do a couple loads of laundry or read a book, and then the second rise, you roll it out into a rectangle, and then let it rise again so you can, cook dinner. Normally I would start this in the morning and then it would be finished by probably around, I would say 1 or 2 o'clock. If I were to start it, say like at 8, and I just, let it just air, not to rush it. But it's really the best bread. I'll show you the finished product. So to show you a finished loaf, this was the one I made, I think Monday or Tuesday of this week. We've already used a whole loaf. I just want to show you. Use a really good serrated knife, but I just want to show you how nice and dense the loaf is, and it's better than probably most store-bought breads that you'll ever eat. So there you have it. Easy bread to make in case the grocery stores are completely empty, and you have 2 loaves probably for the entire week, depending on the size of your family. So about 6 cups of flour, 6.5 cups of flour, and very little ingredients that you would have home most of the time anyway. and you've got bread for the week for your kids or for your husband or yourself. Thank you very much for Jamie Lanai from iHeartNaptime.net. Sorry, I thought it was a .com. I just checked it. It's .net, so it's iHeartNaptime.net. Thank you very much for sharing that video. It's been a lifesaver for me since last end of November. And I don't know, maybe I'll show you how to make pasta because it's quarantine kitchen time.